The distant echoes of gunfire faded into the crisp morning air as Beatrice Valmont clutched her basket tighter, her knuckles whitening as she navigated the bustling market of Sweetwater Springs, Wyoming Territory, 1878. At 22, she had never imagined her life would take such a turn unwed, 5 months pregnant, and alone in a town that thrived on gossip as much as it did on cattle and gold. The small mining and ranching settlement lay nestled in the shadow of the Wind River Range, a place where fortunes were made and lost with equal speed. Beatrice had arrived 8 months prior, seeking refuge after her parents' death left her with nothing but a modest inheritance, and a letter from her mother's cousin offering her a position as a schoolteacher. What she hadn't anticipated was falling in love with Thomas Blackburn, a charming prospector who had disappeared into the mountains after a passionate affair, leaving her with nothing but memories and a growing child within her womb. Beatrice's green eyes darted nervously between the vegetable stalls. She needed to hurry, the morning sickness had delayed her, and the best produce would soon be gone. Her loose-fitting dress concealed her condition to most casual observers, but the local women knew. They always knew. 2 pounds of potatoes and some carrots, please, she requested, avoiding the gaze of Mr. Peterson, the weathered farmer who ran the vegetable stand. Of course, Miss Valmont, he replied kindly, one of the few who treated her with dignity these days. As she waited, a familiar titter rose from behind her. The Mercer sisters Abigail, Elizabeth, and Catherine, daughters of the town's banker, stood in a tight cluster nearby, their expensive dresses and elaborate hairstyles marking them as the elite of Sweetwater Springs. "My goodness, Miss Valmont seems to be gaining weight by the day," Elizabeth Stage whispered, loud enough for Beatrice to hear. "Must be all that comfort eating." "Or perhaps she's simply growing round with sin," Catherine added, her voice dripping with mock concern. Beatrice stiffened, willing herself not to cry. She had endured weeks of similar comments, each one cutting deeper than the last. The pregnancy was showing more prominently now, impossible to hide completely. "Ladies," Mr. Peterson began, his face reddening with anger, but his protest was cut short. "I hear the father was a drifter," Abigail continued. "Probably halfway to California by now, smart man, knowing when to leave damaged goods behind." Tears pricked at Beatrice's eyes as she fumbled for her coins. The marketplace had grown quieter, other patrons pretending not to notice the cruel exchange while secretly drinking in every word. "Tell us, Miss Valmont," Elizabeth called out, emboldened by the audience. "How does it feel knowing you'll be raising a bastard in a decent town? Perhaps you should consider moving on before the child arrives. I hear there are places for women like you in Denver." Beatrice's hands trembled so violently that coins spilled from her purse onto the dirt. As she bent awkwardly to retrieve them, dizzy with humiliation, a shadow fell across the ground before her. A pair of worn leather boots stepped into her field of vision, followed by a strong hand that gathered her scattered coins in one fluid motion. Beatrice straightened slowly, her eyes traveling upward past dusty denim pants, a weather-beaten leather vest over a faded blue shirt, to meet the steadiest gaze she'd ever encountered. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin that spoke of years under the open sky. Dark hair fell in waves to his collar, partially hidden beneath a worn Stetson. His face bore the rugged lines of hardship and determination, but it was his eyes piercing blue like a summer sky that held her captive. "I believe these are yours, madam," he said, his voice deep, and even as he placed the coins in her palm. His calloused fingers brushed against her skin, warm and reassuring. "Thank you," Beatrice whispered, suddenly aware that the entire marketplace had gone silent. The stranger turned to face the Mercer sisters, who had faltered mid-taunt at his appearance. "I couldn't help but overhear your conversation," he said, his tone deceptively pleasant. "Perhaps you young ladies would care to repeat your concerns directly to me." Elizabeth Mercer recovered first, her chin lifting in defiance. "This doesn't concern you, stranger. We're merely pointing out that certain moral failings shouldn't be flaunted in public." The man took a deliberate step forward, his spurs clinking softly against the hard, packed earth. Though his expression remained calm, something dangerous flickered in his eyes. The only moral failing I see is three privileged women harassing a lady who's done nothing to deserve such treatment. Abigail scoffed. Lady, she's carrying a child without a husband. There's a name for women like that, and it isn't lady. The marketplace seemed to hold its collective breath as the stranger removed his hat in a gesture that somehow felt more threatening than respectful. He ran a hand through his dark hair before replacing the Stetson. That child, he said, voice carrying clearly across the now silent market, is mine. Beatrice's breath caught in her throat. She stared at the man in confusion, certain she had never seen him before in her life. And this woman, he continued, stepping beside Beatrice and gently placing his hand at the small of her back, is under my protection. She is mine. The declaration hung in the air like a gunshot. The Mercer sisters gaped in disbelief, their perfect composure shattered. I don't believe you, Catherine finally stammered. Everyone knows she was with Thomas Blackburn before he left town. The stranger's smile didn't reach his eyes. Madam, what you believe is of no consequence to me. But if I hear that any of you have spoken another unkind word to her, you'll learn exactly how consequential my displeasure can be. Though no explicit threat was issued, something in his tone made the sisters pale. Now, he said, turning back to Beatrice with unexpected gentleness, allow me to carry your basket, darling. You shouldn't be straining yourself in your condition. Stunned, Beatrice could only nod as he took the basket from her hands and offered his arm. With the entire town watching, she placed her trembling fingers on his forearm and allowed him to lead her away from the market. They walked in silence until they reached the edge of town, where a massive chestnut gelding was hitched outside the general store. Only then did Beatrice find her voice. Why did you do that? You don't even know me. The stranger regarded her thoughtfully. My name is Quentin O'Malley. I've been riding for the Bar 3 ranch about 20 miles south. Just arrived in town this morning. He paused, his expression softening slightly. As for why I stepped in. My mother raised me to believe that true strength is measured by how you treat those who need protection, not by how you dominate those weaker than yourself. That's admirable, Beatrice replied, still bewildered. But you've now tied yourself to a scandal that isn't yours. Once you leave town, they'll only treat me worse for your deception. Quentin's expression turned serious. Who says I'm leaving town? But surely you don't intend to maintain this pretense? I don't make declarations I don't stand behind, Miss Valmont. Beatrice Valmont, she supplied automatically. Miss Valmont. He nodded respectfully. I've recently taken a permanent position as foreman at the Bar 3. I'll be staying in Sweetwater Springs for the foreseeable future. Beatrice shook her head in disbelief. Mr. O'Malley, while I appreciate your gallantry, I cannot allow you to sacrifice your reputation for mine, the moment people discover you're not actually. She gestured vaguely toward her swollen midsection, the father of your child, he finished for her. A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. People will believe what we give them reason to believe, and right now they need to believe that you are not alone. But why would you do this for a stranger? Quentin adjusted his hat, squinting toward the distant mountains. Maybe I've seen too many good people crushed by the weight of others' judgment, or maybe. He hesitated, something vulnerable flickering across his features. Maybe I know what it's like to be an outsider in a place where belonging means everything. Before Beatrice could respond, a portly man in an expensive suit approached them, his face flushed with indignation. You there, Cowboy, the man called out, waving a walking stick for emphasis. That would be Harold Mercer, the banker, Beatrice whispered urgently, father of those girls. Quentin nodded slightly, positioning himself subtly between Beatrice and the approaching man. Sir, Mercer sputtered upon reaching them, I demand an explanation for your behavior toward my daughters. Your daughters were publicly harassing this lady, Quentin replied evenly. I simply requested they stop, by claiming paternity of her. Mercer lowered his voice, glancing around furtively. Her condition, everyone knows she arrived in town alone. I arrived in February, Beatrice interjected, surprising herself with her sudden courage. This is May. Surely even you can count the months, Mr. Mercer. The banker's face reddened further. The father is Thomas Blackburn. The whole town knows you were seen with him before he left for the mountains. Thomas was a friend who showed me kindness when I arrived, Beatrice stated firmly. Though her heart hammered in her chest, she found strength in Quentin's steady presence beside her. Nothing more. Then where has this supposed father been all this time? Mercer demanded, gesturing at Quentin. Working, Quentin answered simply. Saving to provide for my family. I've been with the cattle drives north to Montana, only returning now that I've secured stable employment with the Bar 3. Mercer's eyes narrowed suspiciously. And why have we never heard Miss Valmont mention you before? A woman in her position must be careful with her reputation, Quentin replied smoothly. We had hoped to marry before the child showed, but my work kept me away longer than anticipated. He turned to Beatrice, his gaze unexpectedly tender. I'm here now, and I intend to make things right. Beatrice felt a warmth bloom in her chest, despite the absurdity of the situation. This stranger was weaving a story about their lives with such conviction that even she almost believed it. I find this all very convenient, Mercer huffed, though his certainty seemed to be wavering. Your opinion on the matter is noted, sir, Quentin said, his polite tone belying the steel in his eyes. Now, if you'll excuse us, Miss Valmont has been on her feet long enough in her condition. Without waiting for a response, Quentin guided Beatrice toward the street where several curious onlookers had gathered to watch the confrontation. You're too bold by half, Mr. O'Malley, Beatrice murmured as they walked, and I still don't understand why you're doing this. Consider it a debt repaid in advance, he replied cryptically. Now, may I escort you home? I believe we have much to discuss about our situation. For the first time in months, Beatrice felt the weight of isolation lift from her shoulders. This unexpected alliance was dangerous, built on falsehoods, and likely doomed to fail yet as she looked up at Quentin O'Malley's determined profile, a flicker of hope kindled in her heart. Yes, she said softly, I believe we do. Beatrice's small cottage sat on the outskirts of Sweetwater Springs, a modest structure with a vegetable garden that had seen better days. The walk there was mostly silent, both of them aware of the eyes following their every move from windows and doorways throughout town. It's not much, she said apologetically as she unlocked the door, but the school board provides it as part of my position. Quentin removed his hat as he entered, revealing the full glory of his dark hair. His eyes took in the neat, sparse furnishings: a small table with two mismatched chairs, a narrow bed with a patchwork quilt, bookshelves filled with well-worn volumes. You're the school teacher. There was genuine surprise in his voice. Yes, though I suspect that position may be in jeopardy now. Beatrice set her market basket on the table and sank gratefully into a chair. The school board has been tolerant thus far, but they've made it clear my employment will end when the child arrives. Quentin frowned, placing his hat on the table. That seems unnecessarily harsh. It's the way of things, Beatrice replied with practiced resignation. Unwed mothers aren't considered suitable influences for impressionable children. But if you were wed. Quentin let the implication hang in the air. Beatrice looked up sharply. Mr. O'Malley, surely you're not suggesting a continuation of our charade? For now, yes. He pulled out the other chair and sat down, leaning forward with his forearms on his knees. Miss Valmont, I won't pretend to understand all you've been through, but I know enough of small towns to recognize that your situation is precarious. And yours isn't, she countered. You've just arrived and already aligned yourself with the town scandal. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. I've weathered worse storms. Beatrice studied him, trying to reconcile this man's inexplicable kindness with her experience that nothing in life came freely. What do you gain from this arrangement, Mr. O'Malley? The question seemed to surprise him. He leaned back, considering her with those penetrating blue eyes. Not everyone acts solely from self-interest, Miss Valmont. In my experience, most do, she replied softly. Something flickered across his face: recognition, perhaps, or shared understanding. Then we've had similar experiences. He paused, then continued more gently. The truth is, I came to Sweetwater Springs seeking a fresh start. The Bar 3 offered me a position as foreman based on my reputation from previous ranches. That reputation matters to me. Then why risk it for a stranger? Because some things matter more than reputation. His gaze held hers steadily. I watched my sister endure similar treatment in another town years ago. No one stood for her then. I won't make the same mistake twice. The revelation hung between them, a glimpse of the man behind the confident exterior. I'm sorry about your sister, Beatrice offered quietly. Quentin nodded once, acknowledging her sympathy without inviting further questions. Here's what I propose. We maintain the story that I'm the father of your child. I'll court you properly, as would be expected. In time, we can announce our engagement. And then, Beatrice prompted, her heart racing at the audacity of his plan. And then circumstances can change. Perhaps I receive word that requires me to leave. Perhaps you decide I'm not the man you thought, he shrugged. But by then, you'll have weathered the worst of the gossip with your position intact. Beatrice stood and moved to the window, watching a hawk circle lazily in the distant sky. The proposition was tempting a shield against the cruelty she faced daily, yet it was built on deception, and she'd had enough of lies in her life. The father, she said quietly, still facing the window, was Thomas Blackburn. We were to be married when he returned from his prospecting trip. She turned to face Quentin. He never came back. There was a rock slide in the mountains in February. They found his body when the snow began to melt in April. Quentin's expression softened with genuine sympathy. I'm sorry. We weren't careful, she continued, needing him to understand the full truth if he was to be part of this deception. It was foolish, but we were in love, or what passes for it when you're young and believing in promises. Her hand drifted unconsciously to her stomach. I discovered my condition after they found his body. Quentin absorbed this information silently, his face betraying nothing of his thoughts. If you want to withdraw your offer, I understand, Beatrice said, lifting her chin slightly. My situation is more complicated than you anticipated. On the contrary, Quentin replied, rising to his feet, it's exactly as complicated as I suspected. He moved toward her, stopping at a respectful distance. My offer stands, Miss Valmont. In fact, knowing the truth only strengthens my resolve. Beatrice studied him, searching for any sign of judgment or ulterior motive. Finding none, she asked the question that had been burning in her mind since the marketplace. Why me? Why this battle? Quentin's expression turned distant, as though he was looking beyond the walls of the cottage to something only he could see. I've spent 15 years drifting from ranch to ranch, town to town, fighting other men's battles, protecting other men's interests. I've seen enough injustice to last several lifetimes. His focus returned to her, intense and clear. Maybe I'm tired of drifting. Maybe I want something real to fight for, even if it starts as a pretense. The raw honesty in his voice resonated with something deep inside Beatrice. She recognized in him the same weariness, the same longing for connection that had led her to Thomas's arms. Very well, Mr. O'Malley, she said finally, extending her hand as though to seal a business arrangement. I accept your unusual proposal. Instead of shaking her hand, Quentin took it gently between both of his. The calluses on his palms spoke of years of hard labor, yet his touch was surprisingly tender. If we're to convince anyone of our attachment, you should probably start calling me Quentin. A faint blush colored her cheeks. And you should call me Beatrice. Beatrice, he repeated, as though testing the feel of her name on his tongue. A smile transformed his face, softening the hard lines and illuminating his eyes. It suits you. For the first time in months, Beatrice felt something other than dread and loneliness. This arrangement was madness, a fantasy that couldn't possibly end well, yet in that moment, with Quentin's warm hands enveloping hers, she allowed herself to hope. Now, he said, releasing her hand and settling back into practical matters, we should discuss the details of our story. The more consistent we are, the more believable it will be. As they sat at her small table crafting the tale of their fictional romance, Beatrice realized that Quentin O'Malley might be the most dangerous man she had ever met, not because of any threat he posed, but because of how easily he made her believe that things might actually turn out all right. The following Sunday, Beatrice sat nervously in the back pew of Sweetwater Springs' only church, a white clapboard building that served as the town's spiritual and social center. She had almost decided against attending, knowing the scrutiny she would face. But Quentin had insisted it was important to present a united front. Nothing says legitimate like sitting together in church. He had reasoned when he collected her in a rented buggy that morning, looking surprisingly refined in a clean, dark suit and freshly trimmed hair. Now, as Reverend Walsh droned on about forgiveness and redemption, Beatrice was acutely aware of the whispers and sidelong glances directed their way. Quentin sat beside her, seemingly oblivious to the attention, his shoulder occasionally brushing against hers in a way that felt both comforting and unsettling. Their story had spread through town with remarkable speed. According to the tale they had crafted, Quentin had met Beatrice before she came to Sweetwater Springs, during a brief stay in Denver. Their romance had been passionate but short-lived, as his work with the cattle drives had taken him away. Unbeknownst to him, he had left her with child. Only upon settling at the Bar 3 had he learned of her presence in the nearby town and come immediately to make things right. It was a story simple enough to maintain yet romantic enough to soften some hearts. Still, Beatrice knew that many in town, particularly the Mercer family and their social circle, remained skeptical. As the service concluded and the congregation filed out into the bright May sunshine, Beatrice braced herself for the inevitable social gauntlet. Quentin offered his arm, which she took gratefully, drawing strength from his solid presence. "Miss Valmont," called Martha Sullivan, the midwife and one of the few women who had shown Beatrice genuine kindness. "And this must be your Mr. O'Malley. What a pleasure to finally meet you, sir." Quentin tipped his hat respectfully. "Madam, I understand you've been looking after Miss Valmont in my absence. You have my sincere gratitude." The older woman beamed, clearly charmed. Someone had to ensure our teacher was taking proper care of herself and the little one. "Have you set a date for the wedding yet?" Beatrice tensed, but Quentin answered smoothly. "We're discussing the matter. I've only just secured proper accommodations at the Bar 3, and I want everything to be right before I bring my family home." Mrs. Sullivan nodded approvingly. "Very sensible. Though you might not want to wait too long, considering." She glanced meaningfully at Beatrice's growing abdomen. "We'll take your advice to heart, madam," Quentin assured her with a smile that made the midwife blush like a girl half her age. As they continued their progress toward the buggy, they were intercepted by Harold Mercer and his wife Augusta, flanked by their 3 daughters. The banker's expression was coldly polite, his wife's openly hostile. "Mr. O'Malley, Miss Valmont," Mercer greeted them with a tight nod. "I trust you found today's sermon illuminating. Reverend Walsh has such insight into matters of moral character." "Indeed," Quentin replied evenly. His words on forgiveness were particularly moving. "Wouldn't you agree, darlin'?" He turned to Beatrice with such convincing affection that she momentarily forgot their arrangement was a charade. "Yes," she managed, recovering quickly. "Though I especially appreciated his thoughts on not judging others lest we be judged ourselves." Augusta Mercer's lips pinched into a thin line. "Some actions speak for themselves, requiring no judgment from others to reveal their true nature." "How fortunate that love is one such action, Mrs. Mercer," Quentin countered, his smile never wavering as he placed his hand protectively at the small of Beatrice's back. "Now, if you'll excuse us, Miss Valmont should rest. In her condition, she tires easily." As they walked away, Beatrice could feel the Mercers' glares burning into her back. "They'll never accept this," she murmured once they were out of earshot. "They're determined to see me ruined." "The Mercers aren't the entire town," Quentin observed, helping her into the buggy with careful hands. "Did you notice how many people greeted you warmly today? How many seemed genuinely pleased that you'd found happiness?" Beatrice considered this as he climbed in beside her. It was true. Several townspeople had approached them with genuine congratulations. Even Mayor Richardson and his wife had made a point of introducing themselves to Quentin and inviting them both to their annual summer social next month. "Perhaps," she conceded as he took up the reins. "But their acceptance is based on a lie." Quentin guided the horses onto the main road before responding. "Is it? The child is real. Your need for support is real." He glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. "Sometimes people just need permission to show kindness. Our story gives them that permission." They rode in companionable silence for a while, the rhythmic clop of hooves and creak of wagon wheels filling the space between them. The day was beautiful, the Wyoming landscape stretching vast and wild around them, snow-capped mountains rising majestically on the horizon. "I've been thinking," Quentin said finally as they approached her cottage. "We should be seen together more often if we're to make this convincing. Perhaps I could escort you to school in the mornings, and we might take supper at the hotel dining room once or twice a week." Beatrice considered the suggestion. Their arrangement had already improved her daily life considerably. The cruel comments had largely subsided, and several of her students' mothers who had been avoiding her now greeted her warmly again. Still, the prospect of more time in Quentin's company both thrilled and terrified her. "Won't that interfere with your work at the bar 3?" she asked, searching for practical objections. "I'm up before dawn anyway, and the ranch is on the way to town from the school. As for suppers, I need to eat somewhere." He shrugged as though it were the simplest thing in the world. "Unless you'd rather not spend the time with me." "No, it's not that," Beatrice said hastily. I don't want to take advantage of your kindness." Quentin brought the buggy to a stop outside her cottage. "Beatrice," he said, using her given name with a familiarity that sent a small shiver through her, "you're not taking advantage. If anything, I'm grateful for the company." There was a hint of vulnerability in his admission that touched her deeply. As he helped her down from the buggy, his hands lingering at her waist perhaps a moment longer than necessary, Beatrice made a decision. "Supper at the hotel tomorrow evening would be lovely," she said, surprising herself with her boldness. "And I would appreciate the escort to school." The smile that lit his face made her heart flutter in a way she hadn't experienced since Thomas. The sensation brought with it a wave of guilt, followed by confusion. This was an arrangement of convenience, nothing more. She had no business feeling anything beyond gratitude toward Quentin O'Malley. Yet as he tipped his hat and climbed back into the buggy, promising to return the following morning, Beatrice couldn't deny the warmth that bloomed in her chest. It was dangerous, this feeling. Dangerous and completely unexpected. But as she watched him drive away, she realized that for the first time since learning of Thomas's death, she was looking forward to tomorrow. Over the next few weeks, their pretense gradually evolved into a comfortable routine. True to his word, Quentin appeared each morning to escort Beatrice to the schoolhouse, his tall figure atop his chestnut gelding becoming a familiar sight to the townsfolk. 3 evenings a week, they dined together at the hotel, their conversations growing increasingly easy and genuine. Beatrice learned that Quentin had grown up on a small farm in Missouri, the son of Irish immigrants who had lost everything in the war. He had left home at 16 after his parents' deaths, working his way west as a cowhand. He spoke little of the years between, though occasionally a comment or faraway look hinted at experiences both profound and painful. In turn, she shared stories of her childhood in Boston, her father's modest success as a merchant, and the illness that had claimed both her parents within months of each other. She told him of her teaching aspirations, her love of literature, and her dreams of someday writing stories of her own. What she didn't share was how his presence had become something she looked forward to each day. How the sound of his laughter made her heart race. How she found herself watching the clock on days when they were to meet, counting the minutes until she would see him again. It was a dangerous path her heart was treading, she knew. Their arrangement had a defined end point once the town accepted their story and her position was secure. Quentin would gradually extract himself from her life. He had been clear about that from the beginning. Yet knowing this did nothing to stem the tide of feelings growing within her. June arrived with unusual heat, bringing with it new challenges as Beatrice entered her 6th month of pregnancy. The schoolchildren were restless with summer approaching, and her expanding waistline made standing before them for hours increasingly uncomfortable. "You look tired," Quentin observed one evening as they walked slowly back to her cottage after supper at the hotel. The setting sun cast long shadows across the dusty street, painting the simple wooden buildings with golden light. "The children were particularly lively today," Beatrice admitted. "And the heat doesn't help." Without warning, Quentin stopped and turned to face her, his expression concerned. "You're pushing yourself too hard. Perhaps you should consider ending the school term early." Beatrice shook her head firmly. "I can't. I need the income, especially now." She rested her hand on her rounded stomach. "Besides, there's only 2 more weeks until summer break." Quentin's gaze followed the movement of her hand, his eyes softening. "May I?" he asked hesitantly, gesturing toward her belly. The question caught her off guard. In all their time together, he had maintained a respectful distance, never presuming intimacies beyond what was necessary to maintain their charade in public. Yet there was such genuine wonder in his expression that she found herself nodding. Cautiously, as though approaching a skittish horse, Quentin reached out and placed his large hand gently on the swell of her stomach. For a moment, they stood frozen in this unexpected intimacy, his palm warm against her even through the fabric of her dress. Then the baby kicked a strong, definite movement against his hand, and Quentin's face transformed with astonishment and something that looked remarkably like joy. "That's incredible," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "He's a strong one." "Or she," Beatrice replied softly, hyper-aware of his closeness, of the scent of leather and soap that clung to him. "Or she," Quentin agreed, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that stole her breath. For a heartbeat, it seemed he might say more, might even lean closer, but then he withdrew his hand and stepped back, the moment broken. "We should get you home," he said, offering his arm once more with casual politeness, as though the intimate exchange had never happened. "You need rest." They walked the remaining distance in silence, each lost in private thoughts. At her door, he tipped his hat as always, but paused before turning to leave. "I won't be able to escort you tomorrow morning," he said, an apologetic note in his voice. "There's a situation at the ranch that needs my attention early, but I'll be in town by afternoon if you'd still like to have supper." "Of course," Beatrice replied, ignoring the disproportionate disappointment she felt at missing their morning ritual. "Is everything all right at the bar 3? A shadow crossed Quentin's face. "Just some trouble with a neighboring outfit, nothing for you to worry about." But there was something in his tone that suggested it was indeed something to worry about. Before she could press further, he bid her good night and was gone, leaving her standing in her doorway with questions unasked and an odd sense of foreboding. The following day passed slowly for Beatrice. The children seemed particularly difficult to manage, and by noon her back ached fiercely. When school finally dismissed for the day, she gratefully sank into her chair, contemplating the walk home with dread. A soft knock at the classroom door roused her from her exhausted contemplation. Expecting a parent, she was surprised to find Elizabeth Mercer standing in the doorway, her usually perfect appearance somewhat disheveled, her expression anxious. "Miss Mercer," Beatrice greeted her cautiously, "what can I do for you?" Elizabeth glanced nervously over her shoulder before stepping fully into the room and closing the door behind her. "I need to speak with you about Mr. O'Malley." Beatrice's heart stuttered. Had the Mercers somehow discovered the truth about their arrangement? What about him? She asked, striving to keep her voice neutral. "There's going to be trouble," Elizabeth said, twisting her gloves in her hands. "Serious trouble. My father and some other men from town rode out to the bar 3 this morning." "Why would they do that?" Beatrice asked, rising from her chair with growing alarm. "They believe Mr. O'Malley isn't who he claims to be." Elizabeth's voice dropped to a whisper. "Father received a telegram yesterday from an associate in Cheyenne. He says your Mr. O'Malley was involved in a shooting there 3 years ago, that he killed a man." Beatrice felt the blood drain from her face. "That's absurd. Quentin is a ranch foreman, not some gunslinger." "The telegram said he was cleared of wrongdoing, it was self-defense, but father doesn't believe it. He says men like that bring violence wherever they go." Elizabeth stepped closer, unexpected sincerity in her eyes. "Miss Valmont, I know we haven't been kind to you, and I'm sorry for that. But I couldn't let you remain ignorant when there might be danger." Beatrice stared at the young woman, trying to reconcile this seemingly genuine concern with the cruel mockery of weeks before. "Why are you telling me this?" Elizabeth looked away, a flush coloring her cheeks. "Because I saw the way he defended you in the marketplace, the way he looks at you when you're not watching. Whatever his past, he clearly cares for you. She met Beatrice's gaze directly. And no one deserves to have the father of their child ridden out of town based on rumors and old grudges. Before Beatrice could respond, shouts erupted from the street outside. They hurried to the window to see a group of riders galloping into town, dust billowing behind them. At their center was Quentin, his face grim and streaked with dirt, a bloodied bandage visible on his upper arm. Without a word to Elizabeth, Beatrice gathered her skirts and rushed from the schoolhouse, her heart pounding with fear. By the time she reached the street, a crowd had gathered around the riders. Sheriff Taylor was there, his weathered face serious as he spoke with Quentin, who had dismounted but kept one hand on his horse's reins, as though ready to depart at any moment. "Quentin," Beatrice called, pushing through the onlookers. He turned at the sound of her voice, relief washing over his features. "Beatrice, you're all right." "Of course I'm all right," she said, reaching his side and noting with alarm the extent of the bloodstain on his shirt sleeve. "You're the one who's injured. What happened?" "Nothing to concern yourself with," he replied, though his eyes told a different story. "A disagreement at the ranch got out of hand," Sheriff Taylor snorted. "That's putting it mildly. Mercer and his friends rode out there looking for trouble, and from what I hear, they found it." He turned to Beatrice, his expression softening. "Don't worry, Miss Valmont. No one was seriously hurt, though a few prides might need tending." The sheriff was just explaining that Mr. Mercer and his associates acted without any legal authority, Quentin added, a hint of anger finally breaking through his controlled facade. "They won't be making that mistake again." Beatrice looked between them, confusion giving way to understanding. "This was about you, about your past." Quentin's expression shuddered. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately." "O'Malley," the sheriff interjected, "you should have Doc Evans look at that arm before you do anything else." "It's just a graze," Quentin dismissed, though the pallor beneath his tan suggested otherwise. "It needs cleaning and proper bandaging," Beatrice insisted, suddenly fierce. "Sheriff, we'll be at my cottage if you need to speak with Mr. O'Malley further. The doctor can find us there." Without waiting for either man's response, she took Quentin's uninjured arm and began guiding him toward her home, ignoring the whispers that followed them through town. For once, she didn't care what anyone thought. All that mattered was getting Quentin somewhere safe where she could tend to his wound and learn exactly what had happened. The moment they were inside her cottage, Quentin seemed to deflate, leaning heavily against the door as it closed behind them. In the privacy of her home, the strong, composed man she knew gave way to one clearly in pain and exhausted. "Sit," she commanded, pulling out a chair, "and take off your shirt. I need to see how bad it is." "It's nothing, Beatrice." If you say just a graze one more time, I swear I will not be responsible for my actions," she interrupted, already gathering clean cloths and a basin of water. "Now, shirt off." A ghost of a smile touched his lips at her vehemence, but he complied, wincing as he carefully removed his vest and shirt. Beatrice sucked in a breath at the sight of his torso, not just because of the lean muscle and sun-bronzed skin now exposed to her gaze, but because of the network of old scars that told stories of a life harder than she had imagined. The current wound was indeed a bullet graze along his upper arm, but it was deep enough to require stitches and had bled profusely. With gentle hands, she began cleaning away the dirt and dried blood. "Will you tell me what really happened?" she asked quietly as she worked. Quentin sighed, his eyes fixed on some distant point. "Mercer and 5 other men rode onto the bar 3 this morning, demanding to speak with me. The owner, Mr. Peterson, tried to send them away, but they were insistent." He winced as she applied pressure to the wound. "They had questions about my time in Cheyenne, about an incident there." "A shooting," Beatrice supplied, remembering Elizabeth's words, his eyes shot to hers, surprise evident. "How did you?" "Elizabeth Mercer came to warn me, strangely enough." She shook her head, still puzzled by the young woman's unexpected kindness. "She said her father received a telegram." Quentin's jaw tightened. "I see, and what else did she tell you?" "That you killed a man, but it was ruled self-defense." Beatrice met his gaze steadily. "Is it true?" For a long moment he was silent, and Beatrice feared he might not answer. Then, slowly, he nodded. Yes, he was a drunk with a grudge and a gun. I was faster. His voice was flat, emotionless. It wasn't the first time I've had to defend myself, though I've never sought trouble. Beatrice absorbed this, trying to reconcile the gentle man she knew with one who had taken lives. And today, what happened at the bar 3? Mercer wasn't satisfied with my explanation. He and his friends decided they didn't want someone with my history in their community. His lips twisted into a humorless smile. When words didn't persuade me to leave, one of them got nervous with his firearm. They shot you, Beatrice gasped, nearly dropping the cloth she held. Accidentally, I think, though the intent was clear enough. Quentin captured her hand in his, stilling her movements. Beatrice, you need to understand something. Men like Mercer, men with power and position, they don't like anything they can't control, and they certainly don't like men like me who don't bow to their authority. That doesn't give them the right to run you out of town based on something that happened years ago, she insisted. No, it doesn't, but it does mean our arrangement has become more complicated. He released her hand, allowing her to continue tending his wound. They'll keep digging. They'll try to find inconsistencies in our story. They might even send telegrams to Denver, looking for anyone who remembers us there. The implications hit her like a physical blow. Our deception will be discovered. Eventually, yes. Quentin's gaze was steady, apologetic. I'm sorry, Beatrice. I wanted to protect you, and instead, I've made everything more difficult. A knock at the door interrupted them. Dr. Evans had arrived, his weathered face grave as he assessed Quentin's injury. Going to need stitches, son, he announced after a cursory examination. Miss Valmont, perhaps you should wait in another room. This isn't a sight for a lady in your condition. I'll stay, Beatrice replied firmly, gathering the bloodied cloths. He's the father of my child. My place is here. The doctor raised an eyebrow but didn't argue, setting to work with practiced efficiency. Quentin endured the procedure stoically, his only reaction an occasional tightening around his eyes when the needle pierced particularly tender flesh. Throughout the ordeal, Beatrice never left his side, sometimes offering a cloth to wipe his brow, other times simply resting her hand on his shoulder in silent support. She was acutely aware that their charade had reached a critical juncture. Soon, they would need to make decisions that would affect both their futures irrevocably. Yet as she watched Quentin bear the pain without complaint, as she remembered the way he had stepped between her and cruelty without hesitation that day in the marketplace, she realized with startling clarity that what had begun as pretense had become something genuine, at least for her. The question now was whether Quentin felt the same, and if so, what they were prepared to do about it. After the doctor left, having prescribed rest and a warning against infection, an awkward silence fell between them. Quentin sat shirtless at her table, his arm freshly bandaged, while Beatrice busied herself making tea, trying to ignore the intimacy of the situation. You should stay here tonight, she said finally, setting a steaming cup before him. It's already dark, and you shouldn't be riding with that arm. Quentin looked up sharply. That would ruin what's left of your reputation. I think that ship has sailed, Beatrice replied with a wry smile, gesturing to her pregnant form. Besides, you're supposedly the father of my child. No one would be surprised. All the more reason I should leave, he said, though he made no move to rise. Beatrice, I don't want to complicate your life further. My life was complicated long before you arrived, Quentin. She sat across from him, cradling her own cup between her palms. And despite everything, these past weeks have been better than I expected. Something vulnerable flickered in his eyes. For me as well. The admission hung between them, fragile and charged with unspoken meaning. Beatrice took a deep breath, gathering her courage. Perhaps we should stop pretending, Quentin stilled. What do you mean, I mean? She faltered, suddenly uncertain. I mean that what began as a deception has become something else, at least for me. She looked down at her tea, unable to meet his gaze as she exposed her heart. I care for you, Quentin, more than I should, given our arrangement. The silence that followed her confession seemed eternal. When she finally dared to look up, she found him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Beatrice, he said, her name a caress on his lips. I never intended for this to happen. When I defended you that day, it was out of principle, not. not because I expected anything to develop between us. I know that, she said quickly, mortification rising as she misinterpreted his words as rejection. And I understand if you don't feel the same. I just thought, you misunderstand me, he interrupted gently, reaching across the table to take her hand. I'm trying to say that I didn't expect to care for you, but I do, deeply, more than I've cared for anyone in a very long time. Hope blossomed in her chest. Truly, truly. His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand, sending shivers up her arm. But caring isn't enough. Your life is here, with the school and the community that's finally beginning to accept you. My past follows me wherever I go. Today proved that. So we face it together, Beatrice said with newfound determination. Quentin, I've lost too much already to let fear dictate my future. If you care for me as I care for you, then we can find a way forward. It won't be easy, he warned, though hope had begun to light his eyes as well. There will be those who never accept us, who will always look for reasons to doubt our story. Then we give them a new story, Beatrice suggested, a plan forming in her mind, one that's true, even if it's not the whole truth. Quentin raised an eyebrow, curiosity replacing caution. What kind of story? That we met before I came to Sweetwater Springs, but only as casual acquaintances. That when you arrived in town and discovered my situation, you offered friendship, which over time became something more. She smiled, warming to the idea. It's not so far from the truth, after all. And the child? Quentin asked gently. Beatrice's hand went protectively to her stomach. The child is Thomas's by blood, yes, but he's gone, and this baby will need a father. She met Quentin's gaze steadily. If you're willing, you could be that father in every way that matters. The vulnerability in Quentin's expression nearly undid her. You would trust me with that responsibility, even knowing what you now know about my past. I would trust you with far more than that, she answered simply. I would trust you with my heart, Quentin O'Malley, if you wanted it. In one fluid movement, he rose and came around the table, kneeling beside her chair despite his injured arm. His free hand cradled her face with infinite tenderness. I want it, he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. I want you, Beatrice Valmont, and the child you carry. I want the life we could build together, however imperfect and challenging it might be. Tears welled in her eyes as joy surged through her. Then take it. Take my heart and give me yours in return. When his lips finally met hers, it was a homecoming Beatrice had never dared to hope for, gentle yet passionate, tentative yet certain. In that kiss was a promise more binding than any they had made before, a truth replacing all their carefully constructed falsehoods. As they parted, breathless and smiling, Quentin pressed his forehead to hers. Stay with me tonight, Beatrice whispered, no longer concerned with propriety or appearances. Stay, and in the morning we'll face whatever comes together. His answer was another kiss, deeper than the first, sealing their new understanding with the sweetest of promises. The following weeks brought challenges and joys in equal measure. True to Beatrice's prediction, their revised story met with mixed reactions. Some, like Martha Sullivan and Mayor Richardson, accepted it readily, pleased to see the schoolteacher happily settled. Others, particularly the Mercer family, remained skeptical and aloof. Harold Mercer had returned from the Bar 3 incident, humiliated and furious. His standing in the community somewhat diminished when Sheriff Taylor made it clear that he and his associates had acted unlawfully. While he maintained his campaign against Quentin, he found less support than before, especially after Mr. Peterson, owner of the Bar 3 and a respected figure in Sweetwater Springs, publicly vouched for his foreman's character. To everyone's surprise, Elizabeth Mercer occasionally visited Beatrice at the schoolhouse, ostensibly to discuss books, but gradually forming a cautious friendship. Her warning about her father's intentions had marked a turning point, revealing a young woman more thoughtful and independent than her family's influence suggested. As July arrived, bringing scorching heat and afternoon thunderstorms, Beatrice found herself confined more frequently to her cottage. The summer break from school was a blessing, as her advancing pregnancy made even simple tasks exhausting. Quentin divided his time between the Bar 3 and town, often spending evenings with Beatrice and returning to the ranch before dawn. Their relationship deepened with each passing day. Quentin proved to be not just protective but attentive, anticipating her needs before she voiced them. He brought her books from his occasional trips to Cheyenne, repaired the sagging porch steps of her cottage, and planted a small garden of late summer vegetables that would be ready when the baby arrived. Most precious to Beatrice were the quiet evenings when he would read aloud to her, his deep voice bringing the words on the page to vivid life as she rested with her feet in his lap, his free hand often straying to caress her growing belly. The child was active now, kicking and rolling in a way that sometimes kept her awake at night, but always made Quentin smile with wonder. "He'll be a horseman," he predicted one evening as a particularly strong movement visibly rippled across her abdomen. "With a kick like that." "Or she'll be a dancer," Beatrice countered with a smile. It had become a gentle game between them, this speculation about the child's gender and future. "Either way, this little one is strong," Quentin said, setting aside the book to place both hands on her stomach. "Like their mother." Beatrice covered his hands with hers, and as steady as their father. The word father still sometimes caught in her throat, a bittersweet reminder of Thomas and all that might have been. Yet increasingly, when she imagined the future, it was Quentin she saw teaching her child to ride, to read, to face the world with courage and compassion. "Have you thought about names?" he asked, his expression serious. Beatrice hesitated. It was a question she had avoided, finding it too painful to contemplate alone and unsure if Quentin would want input into such a personal decision. "If it's a boy," she said cautiously, "I thought perhaps Thomas, to honor his father." She watched Quentin's face carefully for any sign of discomfort. His expression remained open, thoughtful. "Thomas is a fine name, and for a girl," relief washed through her at his easy acceptance. "I'm less decided. My mother's name was Alina, but, Quentin prompted when she trailed off. "But I've also always loved the name Claire." "It means bright or clear," she explained, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "It seems hopeful." "Claire," Quentin repeated, testing the sound. "Claire O'Malley, it has a nice ring to it." Beatrice's breath caught. "O'Malley," Quentin's eyes widened as he realized the implication of his words. I didn't mean to presume," he stammered, suddenly looking more uncertain than she had ever seen him. "I just thought, that is, I hoped." Understanding dawned, and with it a surge of emotion so powerful it brought tears to her eyes. "Quentin O'Malley, are you asking me something?" He took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders as though preparing for battle. Not very well, apparently. A rueful smile touched his lips. "I had planned to do this properly. I even bought a ring in Cheyenne last week. It's hidden in my saddlebag." "You bought a ring?" Beatrice whispered, scarcely believing what she was hearing. "I did." Quentin shifted, kneeling awkwardly beside the sofa where she reclined. "I was waiting for the right moment, but it seems my tongue had other ideas." He took her hands in his expression suddenly solemn. "Beatrice Valmont, I know our beginning was unusual, to say the least. But what began as a deception has become the most honest thing in my life." Tears spilled freely down Beatrice's cheeks now, but she made no move to wipe them away, transfixed by the raw emotion in Quentin's eyes. "I love you," he continued, his voice steady despite the vulnerability of his confession. "I love your courage, your kindness, your fierce determination. I love the way you've opened your heart to me despite every reason not to trust. And I want nothing more than to spend my life trying to be worthy of that trust." He squeezed her hands gently. "Will you marry me, Beatrice? Will you allow me the honor of being your husband and a father to this child?" "Yes," she breathed without hesitation, joy flooding through her like sunlight. "Yes, Quentin, I love you, and I want nothing more than to be your wife." His answering smile was brilliant, transforming his rugged features with happiness. Rising slightly, he captured her lips in a kiss that promised a lifetime of such moments, tender, passionate, and above all, true. When they finally parted, Beatrice laughed softly. "We should retrieve that ring from your saddlebag, don't you think?" Quentin grinned, reluctantly releasing her hands to stand. "It would be my pleasure." He paused, a thought occurring to him. "You know what this means, don't you? Our original deception will become truth after all." "The best kind of truth," Beatrice agreed, watching as he moved to gather his belongings. "One we've chosen for ourselves." As August ripened toward September, preparations for the wedding occupied much of their time. With Beatrice's condition advancing rapidly, they agreed on a simple ceremony at the church, followed by a small gathering at the hotel dining room. The date was set for the second Saturday in August, giving them just enough time to make necessary arrangements while ensuring the ceremony took place well before the baby's expected arrival in early October. Martha Sullivan took charge of helping Beatrice adapt one of her better dresses for the occasion, cleverly modifying it to accommodate her growing form while still appearing suitably bridal. Mayor Richardson insisted on providing the wedding supper at the hotel as his gift, and even Reverend Walsh, initially hesitant about the circumstances, warmed to the couple's obvious devotion to each other. The Mercers, predictably, declined their invitation, but to everyone's surprise, Elizabeth sent a beautiful hand-embroidered blanket for the baby with a note expressing her sincere wishes for their happiness. It was a small gesture, but one that moved Beatrice deeply. Quentin, meanwhile, worked tirelessly to prepare their future home. Rather than continuing to live in the foreman's cabin at the Bar 3, he had purchased a small but sturdy house on the edge of town with land enough for a few horses and a decent garden. The previous owner, an elderly widower returning east to live with his daughter, had maintained it well, though it needed a woman's touch to truly become a home. Each evening after his work at the ranch, Quentin devoted hours to small improvements, fixing loose boards, repainting shutters, building a cradle for the coming child. Beatrice would often join him, arranging her modest collection of books on newly installed shelves or discussing where furniture should be placed. It was during one such evening, just 3 days before their wedding, that Beatrice felt the first troubling pain. She dismissed it initially as the normal discomfort of late pregnancy, not wanting to worry Quentin. But when a second sharp cramp seized her an hour later, causing her to gasp aloud, she could no longer hide her concern. "Beatrice," Quentin was at her side instantly, his expression alarmed. "What is it? What's wrong?" "I'm not sure," she admitted, pressing a hand to her lower back where the pain seemed centered. "It's probably nothing, the baby moving, perhaps." But even as she spoke, another pain gripped her, more intense than the last. Quentin's face paled as understanding dawned. "The baby, it's too early." "It can't be," Beatrice insisted, though fear had begun to curl through her. "It's not due for another 6 weeks. I'm getting the doctor," Quentin decided, already moving toward the door. "And Mrs. Sullivan, don't move, I'll be back as quickly as I can." Before Beatrice could protest, he was gone, the sound of his horses' hooves fading rapidly as he galloped toward town. Left alone, she tried to remain calm, counting the minutes between pains and trying to remember everything she knew about childbirth, by the time Quentin returned with Dr. Evans and Martha Sullivan in tow. The pains had increased in both frequency and intensity. The midwife's experienced hands examined Beatrice efficiently while the doctor prepared his instruments. "The baby's coming, there's no stopping it now," Martha announced, her tone brisk but kind. "But you're strong, Beatrice, and the little one feels like a good size despite being early." "Will they be all right?" Quentin asked, his voice tight with fear as he hovered near the bedroom door, uncertain of his place in this traditionally female domain. Dr. Evans clapped him on the shoulder. "Babies come when they're ready, son, not according to our schedules. 6 weeks early is concerning but not catastrophic." His weathered face softened with compassion. "The best thing you can do now is keep water boiling and stay out of the way." For the next several hours, Quentin paced the small house, alternating between stoking the fire to heat water and standing helplessly outside the bedroom door each time Beatrice cried out. The sound of her pain was torture to him, made worse by his inability to share it or ease it. As night deepened, a summer thunderstorm rolled in from the mountains, lightning illuminating the small house in brilliant flashes while thunder shook the windows. It seemed to Quentin that nature itself was participating in the drama unfolding within those walls, violent, primal, and completely beyond his control. Shortly after midnight, as the storm began to wane, a new sound pierced the night, the thin, indignant cry of a newborn taking its first breath. Quentin froze in his pacing, his heart hammering against his ribs as he stared at the closed bedroom door. Minutes that felt like hours passed before it finally opened, revealing Martha Sullivan's tired but smiling face. "Congratulations, Mr. O'Malley," she said warmly. "You have a son." Small but strong just like his mother. Relief and joy crashed through Quentin in equal measure. "And Beatrice, is she?" "Exhausted but well," the midwife assured him. "She's asking for you." Quentin entered the bedroom cautiously, overwhelmed by the tableau before him. Beatrice reclined against pillows, her face pale and drawn with exhaustion, but glowing with a fierce, tender joy as she gazed at the tiny bundle cradled in her arms. Doctor Evans was packing his bag in the corner, his professional demeanor unable to completely hide his satisfaction at a successful delivery. "Quentin," Beatrice called softly, looking up as he approached. Her smile, though weary, was radiant. "Come meet your son." He moved to the bedside in a daze, lowering himself carefully to sit beside her. The bundle in her arms shifted, and she adjusted the blanket to reveal the smallest human being Quentin had ever seen. The child's face was red and wrinkled, eyes squeezed shut against the world, with a dusting of dark hair crowning his perfect head. "He's beautiful," Quentin whispered, reaching out tentatively to touch one tiny fist. To his astonishment, the baby's fingers unfurled and then closed around his much larger one, gripping with surprising strength. Something profound and irrevocable shifted inside him at that moment, a love so immediate and overwhelming that it stole his breath. "Thomas Quentin Valmont," Beatrice said softly, watching the interplay between them. "If that suits you," Quentin looked up, startled to find tears in his eyes. "You want to give him my name as well, of course." Beatrice's free hand came up to cup his cheek tenderly. "He has two fathers, one who gave him life, and one who will teach him how to live it. Both should be honored." Overcome, Quentin leaned forward to press his forehead gently against hers. "Thank you," he murmured, unable to fully express the depth of what he was feeling. "Thank you," she replied simply, understanding anyway, "for being here, for choosing us." Dr. Evans cleared his throat discreetly from the corner. "I hate to intrude on this moment, but I should explain a few things before I go. The boy is early, as we know, which means he'll need extra care these first weeks. Keep him warm, feed him often, and watch for any signs of difficulty breathing. I'll stay tonight to help," Martha added, "and check in daily for the next week, but from what I can see, he's a fighter. I suspect he'll thrive despite his early arrival." After they had gone, leaving instructions to send for them at any sign of trouble, Quentin and Beatrice were left alone with their new son. The storm had passed completely, leaving a profound stillness in its wake. Moonlight streamed through the window, bathing the small family in silver light. "I suppose this changes our wedding plans," Beatrice said softly, adjusting the sleeping infant against her chest. Quentin, who had been watching them with wonder, smiled. "Only the timing. Once you're strong enough, we'll have the ceremony as planned, unless—" A shadow of doubt crossed his face. "Unless you've reconsidered." "Never," Beatrice replied firmly. "I want to be your wife, Quentin O'Malley, now more than ever." Relief softened his features. "Good. Because I fully intend to honor the promise I made that day in the marketplace." He reached out to stroke the baby's cheek with infinite gentleness. "You are mine, both of you, and I am yours for as long as you'll have me." "Forever then," Beatrice murmured, her eyes already drifting closed with exhaustion. "Forever," Quentin agreed, settling more comfortably beside them to keep watch through the night, his heart fuller than he had ever imagined possible. The wedding took place 2 weeks later in the small church, with only a handful of witnesses present. Beatrice wore the modified dress Martha Sullivan had helped prepare, looking radiant despite her recent ordeal. Quentin stood tall in a new suit purchased specifically for the occasion, his expression one of undisguised adoration as he watched his bride approach. Baby Thomas, wrapped snugly in the blanket Elizabeth Mercer had sent, slept peacefully in Martha's arms throughout the brief ceremony. When Reverend Walsh pronounced them husband and wife, Quentin gathered both Beatrice and his new son close, creating a tableau of family that moved even the most stoic observers. The celebration afterward at the hotel was modest but joyful. Mr. Peterson from the Bar 3 proposed a toast to the new family, his gruff voice betraying unexpected emotion as he spoke of Quentin's integrity and Beatrice's courage. Mayor and Mrs. Richardson cooed over the baby, marveling at how quickly he seemed to be growing despite his early arrival. Even Sheriff Taylor unbent enough to offer his congratulations, along with the news that Harold Mercer had recently departed for an extended business trip to Denver, taking his wife and younger daughters with him. Elizabeth stayed behind, he added, watching Beatrice's reaction carefully. Says she's old enough to manage on her own for a few months. Interesting development, if you ask me. Beatrice merely smiled, suspecting there was more to the story but content to let Elizabeth share it in her own time, if she chose to. As the celebration wound down, Quentin leaned close to his new wife, his breath warm against her ear. Ready to go home, Mrs. O'Malley, the name her new name sent a thrill through Beatrice. More than ready, Mr. O'Malley. They departed amid well wishes and knowing smiles, Beatrice carrying Thomas while Quentin helped her into the waiting buggy. The late summer evening was perfect, warm with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of sage and distant rain. Happy? Quentin asked as they drove toward their house, their home at the edge of town. Beatrice looked down at their sleeping son, then up at the man beside her, this man who had changed her life with a single act of kindness, who had chosen to love both her and a child not his by blood, who had shown her that second chances were possible even when all seemed lost. Completely, she answered, leaning against his shoulder as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. And you? Quentin's arm tightened around her as he guided the horses with his free hand. More than I ever thought possible. As they approached their home, where lamplight glowed welcomingly in the windows, Beatrice reflected on the strange, wonderful journey that had brought them to this moment. What had begun with mockery and shame in a marketplace had transformed into something beautiful and authentic, a family forged not by convention, but by choice, by love, by the courage to see beyond appearances to the truth of each other's hearts. And as Quentin lifted her down from the buggy, cradling her and their son with gentle strength, Beatrice knew with absolute certainty that she had found her place in the world not despite the hardships she had endured, but because of them. For without those darkest moments, she might never have recognized the extraordinary light that was Quentin O'Malley, or discovered the depth of her own capacity for love and resilience. Together, they crossed the threshold into their home and their future, the whispered mockery of the past fading into insignificance against the reality of their shared joy. 10 years passed in Sweetwater Springs, years that transformed the small settlement into a proper town with a railroad station, a new schoolhouse, and even a small library that Beatrice helped establish. The decade brought changes to the O'Malley family. As well, Thomas grew into a sturdy, thoughtful boy with his mother's green eyes, and an innate gift with horses that Quentin claimed as proof of his influence. He was joined by 2 siblings. Claire, born 2 years after the wedding, a spirited girl with her father's blue eyes and iron will, and Michael, their youngest, now 3, who combined his mother's intellectual curiosity with his father's quiet strength. Quentin had long since purchased the Bar 3 outright when Mr. Peterson decided to retire to California, transforming it into one of the most successful operations in the county. Beatrice continued teaching at the school until Michael's birth, when she chose to focus on her family and her writing. Her stories of frontier life, published regularly in newspapers as far away as Denver and San Francisco, had earned her a modest reputation and additional income that allowed them to expand their home and holdings. The ghost of Thomas Blackburn faded gradually from their lives, though never completely. Young Thomas knew the story of his birth father, the prospector who had loved his mother but never lived to see his son, and occasionally asked questions that Beatrice answered honestly, but gently. Quentin supported these conversations without jealousy or resentment, secure in the knowledge that he was the only father Thomas had ever known or needed. Elizabeth Mercer, who had remained in Sweetwater Springs after that fateful summer, eventually married the new doctor who replaced the retiring Dr. Evans. Her friendship with Beatrice deepened over the years, becoming one of mutual respect and genuine affection. Her father, upon returning from Denver, had found his influence in the town significantly diminished and eventually relocated the family banking business to Cheyenne, leaving Elizabeth behind to forge her own path. On a crisp autumn morning much like the one when they had first met, Beatrice stood on the porch of their expanded home, watching as Quentin taught Thomas the finer points of roping while Claire attempted to copy their movements with her smaller lasso. Michael sat nearby, solemnly arranging rocks in patterns that made sense only to him, occasionally looking up to offer commentary on his siblings' efforts. The scene filled Beatrice with a contentment so profound it brought tears to her eyes. From where she stood, she could see the town spread out below them, smoke rising from chimneys against the backdrop of mountains painted in autumn gold and crimson. It was a view that never failed to remind her of how far they had come. "Mama, look." Thomas called, successfully completing the maneuver Quentin had been demonstrating. "I did it, wonderful," she called back, clapping her hands in appreciation. "You're becoming quite the cowboy, just like Pa," the boy replied proudly, beaming at Quentin, who ruffled his hair affectionately. "I want to try next," Claire demanded, her small face set with determination. "It's my turn, Patience, little Mustang," Quentin laughed, using his pet name for his headstrong daughter. "Your brother practiced for days before getting it right." "I can do it faster," Claire insisted with the supreme confidence of a 7-year-old. Beatrice smiled, recognizing in her daughter the same stubbornness that had sustained her through her darkest days. These children, each so different and yet all carrying pieces of their parents within them, were the living embodiment of the life she and Quentin had built together, imperfect, occasionally challenging, but ultimately beautiful beyond measure. As she watched, Quentin looked up and caught her eye across the yard. Even after a decade of marriage, that single look filled with understanding, admiration, and unwavering love still had the power to quicken her heartbeat. He excused himself from the children and crossed to join her on the porch, his movements as fluid and confident as they had been the day he first stood beside her in the marketplace. "You're looking thoughtful this morning," he observed, wrapping an arm around her waist and pulling her gently against his side. "Just grateful," Beatrice replied, leaning into his embrace. "For all of this. For you." Quentin pressed a kiss to her temple, his breath warm against her skin. "Funny how life works out, isn't it? If you hadn't been at that market that exact day, if those girls hadn't been cruel, if I hadn't arrived in town precisely when I did." They smiled at the familiar exchange, this recounting of coincidences and choices that had brought them together. "Do you ever regret it?" Beatrice asked suddenly, voicing a question she had never dared to pose before. "Taking on another man's child, standing up for a woman you didn't know." Quentin turned her to face him fully, his hands gentle but insistent on her shoulders. "Not for a single moment," he answered, his voice deep with conviction. "The day I said she is mine was the day I began to live again after years of merely existing. You and Thomas were my salvation, Beatrice. Never doubt that." "And you were ours," she whispered, reaching up to trace the lines that 10 years had added to his beloved face, lines of laughter, of concern, of a life fully lived. A shout from the yard drew their attention back to the children. Claire had apparently convinced her brother to let her try the rope, with predictably chaotic results. The lasso had somehow become tangled around both Thomas and Michael, who were laughing helplessly as Claire tried to rescue them by pulling the rope tighter. "I'd better intervene before she hogties them both," Quentin chuckled, pressing one more kiss to Beatrice's forehead before stepping back. "Go," she smiled, shooing him toward their children. "I'll start lunch." As she turned toward the kitchen, Beatrice paused at the doorway for one last look at her family. Quentin, now kneeling beside all 3 children, patiently untangling the rope while explaining proper technique, the autumn sun gilding them all in warm light. The memory of that long-ago day in the marketplace flashed through her mind, the mockery, the shame, the unexpected intervention that had changed everything. How strange and wonderful that a moment of such humiliation could lead to this life of such profound joy. "She is mine," Quentin had declared that day, a stranger standing tall against cruelty. Now, a decade later, those words had transformed into a deeper truth. They belonged to each other, bound not by pretense or necessity, but by a love that had grown from the most unlikely of beginnings into the surest of foundations. And in that belonging, Beatrice had found not just safety or respectability, but the rarest and most precious gift of all, a home where she was valued completely, loved unreservedly, and accepted unconditionally, exactly as she was.